The Ottoman Sultan Murad I led a vast army, estimated at around 30,000 soldiers, a blend of disciplined janissaries, cavalry, and skilled archers. Against them, Prince Lazar rallied roughly 15,000 men, including heavy cavalry and armored knights who carried the pride of medieval Serbia. Though outnumbered, the Serbian army was fueled by determination and the hope that unity could stop the Ottoman advance. Both sides understood what was at stake. For the Ottomans, victory meant dominance over the Balkans. For the Serbs, it meant survival against a rising empire. By the late 14th century, the Balkans had become the front line of a rising empire. The Ottomans, led by Sultan Murad I, had already crossed into Europe decades earlier, and their power grew with each passing year. Towns and fortresses fell one after another, their disciplined armies proving nearly unstoppable. For many rulers of the region, the choice was clear: submit and pay tribute or be swept aside. But in Serbia, under the leadership of Prince Lazar Hrebeljanović, there was resistance. Lazar understood that the threat was not temporary, not just another raid. The Ottomans sought permanent control, and once Serbia lost its independence, it would never be restored. In this tense atmosphere, Prince Lazar began to rally his people. He called upon the Serbian nobility, urging them to unite under one banner rather than fight each other. This was not easy. Serbian lords often quarreled, each guarding their lands and privileges, but the Ottoman advance was too great to ignore. If they stood divided, Serbia would fall piece by piece. Slowly, alliances were forged. Knights, warriors, and retainers gathered from across the principality, answering Lazar's call. He was not only preparing for battle, he was preparing for a fight that would determine whether his people could hold on to their land, their faith, and their way of life. The choice of Kosovo Polje, the Field of Blackbirds, was not accidental. Situated at a crossroads in the heart of the Balkans, this plain had immense strategic importance. Whoever controlled it could dominate the routes between north and south, east and west. For Lazar, it was a place to make a stand, where the fate of Serbia would be tested against the strength of the Ottomans. For Sultan Murad, it was the key to unlocking all of Serbia and opening the road to Europe beyond. As the two powers moved toward confrontation, the tension in the region was unbearable. Farmers whispered of vast Ottoman armies marching ever closer, their banners stretching beyond sight. Priests called upon the people to pray, to find strength in their faith. Nobles prepared their households for war, knowing that defeat would bring not only death but also the end of their traditions. Everyone knew that the coming clash at Kosovo would not be just another battle. It would be a turning point, one that could either secure Serbia's freedom or mark the beginning of its subjugation. As both sides prepared for war, the scale of what was coming became clear. Sultan Murad I led the Ottomans with confidence, his empire already feared across the Balkans. His army was vast, estimated at around 30,000 men, and it was far from a single-minded mob. The Ottomans had created one of the most disciplined and diverse fighting forces in medieval Europe. At its core were the janissaries, elite infantry trained from youth to fight with unshakable loyalty. Alongside them were skilled archers, light cavalry, and heavily armed Sipahi horsemen, each unit with its own role in breaking an enemy's defenses. They brought not just numbers but organization, experience, and the momentum of countless previous victories. Against them stood Prince Lazar with an army of perhaps 15,000. It was a smaller force, but it carried the pride of Serbia and its allies. Many of Lazar's men were armored knights and heavy cavalry, the elite of Serbian nobility who had grown up training for war. Their armor was thick, their lances strong, and when they charged, the ground itself shook. Behind them stood infantry drawn from villages and towns, men less equipped but hardened by the struggles of frontier life. Lazar was not entirely alone. He had the support of regional allies, including knights and warriors who shared his fear of Ottoman domination. Yet even together, the Serbs were badly outnumbered. The contrast between the two armies could not have been sharper. The Ottomans represented a new kind of military machine, flexible and relentless, while the Serbs relied on the older traditions of feudal knights and personal valor. Still, numbers and tactics were not the only things that mattered. The Serbs were fighting for survival, for their families, their homes, and their faith. That gave them a determination no training could manufacture. Prince Lazar himself embodied this cause, urging his men to see beyond the battlefield, to understand that Kosovo was the place where their future would be decided. both sides gathered at Kosovo Polje with the weight of destiny pressing down on them. For the Ottomans, victory meant opening the gates of Europe and showing the world that their empire was unstoppable. For the Serbs, it meant proving that courage and unity could resist even the greatest of powers. The camps on either side of the plain must have buzzed with anticipation. Fires burning, prayers whispered, weapons sharpened. Soldiers stared into the darkness, wondering if tomorrow would bring glory or death. It was not only a contest of armies, but of wills. Sultan Murad carried the ambition of an empire ready to expand ever further, while Lazar carried the hopes of a people who refused to surrender. By the eve of battle, both leaders understood the enormity of what lay ahead. When the sun rose over Kosovo, it would rise on a day that would be remembered for centuries, a day that would decide far more than the lives of the men who fought. On the morning of June 15, 1389, the stillness of Kosovo Polje was shattered by the sound of war drums and horns. Dust rose from the plain as the Ottoman army advanced, their archers moving forward to unleash a storm of arrows. The sky darkened as volleys rained down, forcing the Serbian infantry to raise shields and brace themselves. Behind the archers, the Ottoman cavalry surged forward, disciplined lines of horsemen sweeping across the field with practiced precision. It was a display of power designed to intimidate, to crush morale before swords even crossed. But the Serbs did not falter. Prince Lazar had placed his heavy cavalry at the heart of his formation, men clad in steel, their lances ready. When the order came, they charged with thunderous force, smashing into the Ottoman flanks. The impact was devastating. Knights drove deep into enemy lines, scattering archers and cutting down cavalry. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the Serbs might succeed where so many others had failed, holding their ground against the Ottoman tide. The clash turned into a brutal melee. Swords clashed, shields splintered, and cries of the wounded echoed across the plain. Serbian warriors fought with a ferocity born of desperation, knowing this was more than a battle of soldiers. It was a battle for their homeland. Each push by the Ottomans was met with stubborn resistance. Each charge by Serbian knights carved gaps into the enemy ranks. Yet as the fighting dragged on, the Serbs faced the weight of Ottoman numbers. Fresh troops rotated into battle, while the Serbian lines grew thinner with every passing hour. The field was a chaos of dust, blood, and iron with no clear victor in sight. But the Serbs had shown something remarkable. They could stand against the mighty empire, and for a moment hope flickered that the impossible was within reach. The Battle of Kosovo had begun not as a quick conquest, but as a test of endurance. And on that first furious day, it was Serbia's courage and steel that left the deepest mark. At dawn on June 15, 1389, the armies faced one another across the wide plain of Kosovo Polje. The silence of the early morning was soon broken by the deep thud of Ottoman war drums and the shrill blasts of horns echoing across the field. The ground trembled beneath the advance of Sultan Murad's army, as lines of archers stepped forward, drawing their bows in unison. A sudden hiss filled the air as thousands of arrows rained down, striking shields, armor, and unprotected men. The first shock of battle was brutal, designed to weaken and scatter the Serbian lines before the real assault began. But Prince Lazar's forces did not break. With disciplined resolve, the Serbian knights prepared their counterstrike. At Lazar's command, the heavy cavalry surged forward, the thunder of hooves shaking the earth as armored horsemen drove their lances into the Ottoman flanks. The impact was ferocious. Arrows and light infantry were crushed beneath the charge, and for a time, the Ottoman ranks wavered. Steel clashed against steel, horses reared, and men fell in the chaos. The Serbs, though outnumbered, struck with precision and sheer determination, forcing the Ottomans back in places and cutting deep into their formations. The battlefield became a storm of dust, cries, and blood. Knights and foot soldiers fought side by side, each swing of a sword and thrust of a spear a desperate attempt to hold the line. The Ottomans countered with disciplined cavalry charges of their own, and soon the plain dissolved into close combat, where survival depended on endurance and strength. For a moment it seemed as if Lazar's gamble might succeed. His knights had shown that even the might of the Ottoman Empire could be shaken. Men spoke later of the courage that burned in those first hours, when Serbian steel and spirit seemed strong enough to defy the inevitable. Yet beneath the fierce struggle, another truth was becoming clear. While the Serbs fought with valor, the Ottomans fought with numbers and endless reserves. The longer the day stretched on, the more that advantage would tip the balance. The battle had begun in fury, and though both sides suffered, neither was willing to yield. Kosovo had become a crucible, and only time would decide which side could endure its fire. Amid the chaos of steel and blood at Kosovo, a single act would change the course of the battle and echo through history. As the fighting raged, a Serbian knight named Miloš Obilić emerged from the turmoil with a daring plan. According to tradition, he resolved to strike directly at the heart of the Ottoman army, its commander, Sultan Murad I. The details remain clouded by legend, but the story tells that Obilić approached the Ottoman camp under the guise of a defector or prisoner, gaining just enough access to reach the Sultan himself. There in the midst of the army, he struck a fatal blow, killing Murad with his blade. The death of a sultan during battle was unheard of. For the Serbs, news of Murad's fall brought a surge of hope, almost as if the heavens had intervened on their behalf. Soldiers whispered Miloš's name with awe, seeing in his act the courage of a man willing to sacrifice everything for his people. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Ottomans might crumble, their leader fallen and their fate uncertain. But the Ottomans did not break. Murad's son Bayezid acted with ruthless speed. Without hesitation, he assumed command and ensured his father's death did not become a weakness. Executions of suspected traitors kept discipline tight, and orders were shouted with authority that rallied the soldiers back into line. Bayezid's decisiveness steadied the army and turned what could have been disaster into renewed fury. For the Serbs, the daring strike was both triumph and tragedy. Miloš Obilić's act was remembered as one of the greatest displays of personal bravery in medieval history. Yet it was not enough to change the balance of power. The Ottomans, far from retreating, pressed their advantage with renewed determination. What might have been a decisive blow to an empire instead became a legend of resistance. Proof that even in the darkest moments, one man's courage could shake the mightiest of foes. As the sun rose higher over the battlefield, the struggle at Kosovo Polje dragged into a brutal war of attrition. The Serbs had fought with astonishing bravery, striking blows that stunned even the Ottomans, but time and exhaustion began to take their toll. Waves of fresh Ottoman soldiers rotated into the fight, while Lazar's forces, fewer to begin with, grew weaker with every hour. Knights who had charged with thunderous strength in the morning now fought on foot, their horses dead, their armor dented and stained with blood. The plain that had been green at dawn was now a churned wasteland of dust, broken weapons, and fallen men. Prince Lazar himself remained at the heart of the struggle. Accounts say he fought not as a distant commander, but as a leader who shared the danger of his men. His presence was a rallying point. Wherever his banner flew, Serbs gathered their strength and pushed forward again. But the relentless pressure of the Ottomans could not be denied. Their discipline and numbers slowly closed in on the Serbian positions, squeezing them from all sides. As the battle wore on, Lazar was eventually captured. The exact circumstances remain uncertain. Some say he was surrounded and overwhelmed in the melee, others that he was taken prisoner after his bodyguards were cut down. What is certain is that he was brought before Bayezid, the newly risen Ottoman leader who wasted no time in demonstrating his power. Lazar was executed, his death sealing the fate of the Serbian army. For his people, his fall was a devastating blow, yet it also became the foundation of his legend. With their prince gone and their ranks shattered, the Serbs could no longer hold the field. Resistance turned into desperate pockets of fighting, each man trying to sell his life dearly against the advancing Ottomans. Though the Ottomans themselves had suffered heavy losses, including the death of their own sultan, the sheer weight of their forces carried the day. Kosovo Polje was littered with the dead from both sides, a grim testament to the ferocity of the clash. Yet the story of Prince Lazar did not end in defeat. In Serbian memory, he became more than a fallen leader. He was remembered as a martyr who chose sacrifice over surrender. Ballads and stories preserved his image as a ruler who gave his life for his faith and his people, a symbol of unyielding resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. His capture and death may have marked the end of Serbian hopes on that battlefield, but in the centuries to come, it became the beginning of a national myth. Kosovo was no longer just a place of loss. It became sacred ground, tied forever to the courage and sacrifice of Prince Lazar. The Battle of Kosovo ended with both armies devastated, but the long-term consequences shifted the balance of power in favor of the Ottomans. Though the Serbs had fought with unyielding bravery and had even slain Sultan Murad, Their losses were too great to recover. Prince Lazar was gone. Much of the Serbian nobility lay dead, and the weakened principality could no longer resist Ottoman expansion with the same strength. Within the following decades, Serbia would gradually fall under Ottoman rule. Its independence eroded piece by piece until it became part of the empire it had tried so desperately to resist. Yet what made Kosovo unique was not just the military outcome, but the memory it created. For the Serbs, the battle became more than history. It became legend. Songs, poems, and epic tales began to immortalize the courage of Prince Lazar and the sacrifice of Miloš Obilić. Lazar was remembered not as a defeated ruler, but as a martyr who had chosen a heavenly kingdom over an earthly one, a man who placed honor and faith above life itself. Obilić was celebrated as the hero who dared to strike down the Ottoman Sultan in the midst of his own army. These stories gave meaning to a tragedy and transformed defeat into a symbol of resistance and spiritual victory. In the centuries that followed, Kosovo became a cornerstone of Serbian identity. The memory of the battle was passed down from generation to generation, shaping how the Serbs saw themselves and their place in history. Even as Ottoman rule tightened its grip, the tale of Kosovo reminded the people that they had once stood proudly against overwhelming odds. It nurtured a sense of resilience, a belief that no matter how dark the times, the spirit of resistance could never be extinguished. For the Ottomans, the legacy was different but no less significant. The death of Sultan Murad was a reminder of the dangers even the most powerful rulers faced on the battlefield. Yet the ability of Bayezid to take control so swiftly and turn potential chaos into victory demonstrated the empire's strength and adaptability. Kosovo became another step in the Ottoman advance into Europe, proving that their armies could overcome even the fiercest resistance. The true legacy of Kosovo lies in how it lived on in memory long after the bodies were buried. It was not remembered as a simple loss, but as a moral victory that gave Serbia a story of sacrifice, heroism, and faith that outlasted centuries of foreign rule. Even today, the name Kosovo carries weight, symbolizing both the cost of freedom and the endurance of a people who refuse to forget their past. The battlefield may have been soaked in blood, but its story became eternal, woven into the very fabric of Serbian history and identity. The Battle of Kosovo was more than a single clash of armies. It was a turning point that shaped the destiny of nations. On that June day in 1389, the Serbs stood against the might of the Ottomans with courage that defied their smaller numbers. They struck hard, broke through the enemy lines, and even brought down a sultan, something almost unthinkable in medieval warfare. Yet the cost was terrible. Prince Lazar was captured and executed, much of the Serbian nobility was lost, and the principality itself was left too weak to resist the relentless expansion of the empire. For the Ottomans, Kosovo was a victory paid for with blood, but it strengthened their path into the Balkans and opened the way for greater conquests. For the Serbs, it was a defeat that transformed into legend. The sacrifice of Lazar, the daring of Miloš Obilić, and the bravery of countless unnamed soldiers were remembered not as the end of a nation, but as the birth of a story that gave meaning to centuries of struggle. In the end, Kosovo